Coming up this hour.
And we have an emotion that we feel, and that emotion is called grief. That's a godly emotion, the emotion of grief. So grief is the emotion we feel. Now mourning, this is not M-O-R, it's M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. Mourning is the process of healing and restoration.
Thank you for joining us on It's a New Day. Barry Buzza is our guest today, and he's written a new book called Good Mourning.
Mourning in the sense that when there's been death in the family, or there is a mourning that happens. And so often we look at death as being a very sorrowful time, and it is. It's a grieving time.
It is.
But can we mourn in a good way, is really what Barry is dealing with. And as Christians, when you look at Paul writing in the New Testament, he talks about the fact that he actually at one point in his life, he says, I would rather go and be with the Lord. The death is a reality for every one of us, somewhere along the way. But sometimes it seems inappropriate, and it doesn't seem to be convenient. I mean, it's just not nice right now.
Well,
We've got to deal with these
the loved
things.
ones behind, and that's what we're going to be dealing with.
How do loved ones that remain, how do we mourn in a way that brings life out of it instead of death? God doesn't want us to have death out of this, but experience. There's a life experience in our hearts. Stay with us. Experience Good Mourning.
I'm grateful to have with us Barry Buzza today. He's been a guest here on It's a New Day several times in the past, doing wonderful teaching series, and you're going to enjoy these programs. Barry, it's good to have you back.
Thank you, Bob.
I classify you a friend, personally, but also a friend of the ministry, and caring for us. But coming here as a pastor, you come and you care for the people, and I really appreciate that.
It's my honor.
Yeah. Barry is the pastor of North Church in Coquitlam, and they have multiple campuses in the area. And as well, you're the president of the Foursquare Church of Canada.
That's right.
That keeps you busy.
It does, yeah.
But you're a pastor to pastors.
Yeah.
And helping them, teaching them, leading them. And but then as a result, you create material, multiplying your efforts.
Yeah, it's kind of changed over the year. As you grow older, your emphasis evolves a bit, and so more as a visionary leader and caring for the leaders, caring for pastors. That's what I do. Yeah.
Okay. For our BC viewers, and here's the interesting thing. Well, I'd like to get into this just a little bit. Yeah. BC viewers, they could visit one of your campuses. Where would that be?
Well, we're in Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and Port Moody. We call it the Tri-Cities. That's on the east side of Vancouver, about 20 miles east of Vancouver. So it's
and they're all called North Church?
They're all called Northside Church. Yeah.
Northside Church.
That's right. Different so Northside Poco campus, Northside Coquitlam campus, Northside Grace, different campuses. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's talk about your church campus here, because here's the thing: if you're in the area, I really encourage you. Get there and get connected, that type of thing. But then there's also ways that people, you're going to spend a couple of days with, they're going to say, man, I like this guy. I'd like to get connected with what they're doing. And you've made video a large part of your ministry and outreach.
Yeah,
now.
we've been at it for 30 years. Susan and I started the church 30 years ago. And the church is growing and has a significant base and influence now where we are. But there's a scripture that came to us just, I guess, a couple of years ago, that God has brought us to a broad place. And we feel like there's a foundation here, and I'm at the age now where God wants us to take our ministry wider. I've been traveling around the world teaching pastors just pastoral principles, leadership principles, visionary principles, organizational principles, those kinds of things. But I've really had a passion for Canada. And there's all kinds of smaller churches in sometimes remote parts of British Columbia or Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or wherever. And I just felt like God wanted us to have an influence, something to give away to them. So we've gone to video. It's something we've been thinking about working on for years, but we're doing it seriously now. All the Wednesday night, on Wednesday night for 30 years, I've been just going through the Bible. That's the primary thing I do, is teach the Word of God. So this year, we're putting 52 videos through the entire Bible. And so I've taught the Red Thread series here before, Bob. Mm-hmm. And we take that Red Thread series, and there's a reading that the person does, and then I teach it on Wednesday night. So we're giving these to small churches. Maybe you have a home church somewhere, and you just need somebody to come in as an outsider and teach. And the home church leader pastors the people, and we provide the teaching for that. So that's been used quite a few places right now. And now we're moving to Sunday morning, but we're not videoing. It's not like somebody's watching our church service. On Thursday morning, I speak to whoever it is across the nation, even overseas. Yeah. Our videos are used overseas also, where I speak to them and teach them by video. And then we on Sunday morning use the video, so we have a big 16-foot wide screen at all campuses, and then I teach. Then we have a campus pastor that pastors and cares for the people. I provide leadership, inspiration, direction, teaching by video.
Love it.
Yeah, it's going really well, and it's just unlimited what you can do.
Yeah,
I've had several people contact me. Can I start a campus here? Can I start a campus there? And I said, yeah, that's fine. So then we work with the campus pastors and begin campuses that way.
Good.
It's good.
Good. Thank you, Barry.
You're welcome.
And the other thing that you find yourself in is doing a lot of writing.
Yeah, I've slowed down a bit. I wrote 2 books this year, but I guess in 10 years I've written 22 books. Mm-hmm. I put them out pretty fast, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But these are as well tools that you give, to help pastors, to help people, through the seasons of life that we go through.
Yeah, that's what I write. I write it's easy to write because it's just stuff that pastors do. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we're going to talk about Good Mourning this morning, Bob. And so I talked to a lot of people about the grieving mourning process. So I thought, well, I'll write it down in a book. All that I would say to a person that comes into my office, I'll just write in a book. I can spend an hour with a person and then give them the book. They can read it, and we can come back, a month later and talk about it again. But the book gives all the material. And that way they're not just listening, they're looking, they're studying, they're reading it. And sometimes they'll read these 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times and get it into them. So most of the books I write are just pastoral counsel that I'm giving to somebody.
Good. And I appreciate that, because I think today will be a day like that, where you have an opportunity to, our viewers and partners here, you have an opportunity to have a pastor in your home, and he's just going to help us and counsel us in the area of mourning, and mourning well, and the necessity of mourning. So he's authored this book, Good Mourning, From Darkness to Morning, different morning, sunshine, sunrise, and seasons of loss. And each of us, run into those seasons where we lose. And then tomorrow we're going to talk about dying well, preparing ourselves for the inevitable. Mm-hmm. Okay. Pastor, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you, Bob.
So let's talk now, about good mourning, the necessity of mourning, and, the process, of loss in our lives. Because it's not just death.
It's not just death.
We don't want to just say, this is about losing a lost loved one.
Right.
No, it's about loss.
Right.
A loss of a dream, a loss of a job, whatever it might be. But there is a process.
There's all
to keep us healthy.
Loss, yeah. It's probably one of the most common things that I counsel people. If you've got 100 people in your church, there's probably 20 people that are going through loss of something in their life. Loss of a pet, like you say, retirement, old age, whatever it is. There's losses all through our lives, big losses and small losses. So this is very applicable. And then it may not be for us, but it may be our neighbor is going through loss.
Okay.
And then we could recommend to him or her, they either read the book or we could help them through it just by what we know about the mourning process.
It's interesting, just having a word or two.
Yes, it is.
How you can just, speak life and and calm a storm in a person's life.
Really, it's true. Probably the most important thing we can do, and it's not what I'm going to do right now, but the most important is just listen to people. As people tell their stories, and then we listen to them, and we really actively listen and care about their loss. When loss comes, and death is the primary loss, I suppose, but when loss comes, it's like being covered in a blanket. We're covered in a shroud of darkness, and we feel like we're just isolated and we're just suffering alone. And we have an emotion that we feel, and that emotion is called grief. That's a godly emotion, the emotion of grief. So grief is the emotion we feel. Now, mourning, this is not M-O-R, it's M-O-U-R-N-I-G. Mourning is the process of healing and restoration. So it kind of goes like this. There's a loss that comes. Then the emotion of grief comes, which I'll explain as we go through here. And then we go through this good mourning process, which has 7 steps to it, which I'll go through this morning. And then a return of health. And then joy comes in the morning. So we go through those 5 steps. And that's the way God intended it to be. So understanding that the grief is okay is the beginning of the process. So I'm going to turn to the Bible, if that's okay, Bob.
Yes, that'd be great.
I know that's okay with you.
I think that'd be just fine.
A very emotional. Now we have levels of emotional being. Some people are more emotional than others, and emotion is God-given. God's an emotional God. He has feelings. He laughs, he cries, he feels. And so emotions are from God. Some people have more expression of emotion, and some cultures have more expressions of emotions than others. The Jewish culture is an emotional culture. And so David was one of the primary speakers in the Jewish culture and really felt this emotion. And he was going through tremendous loss. And not even death, but just loss. He was a young man. And Saul was persecuting him before he even became king. He's only in his 20s. And he wrote some psalms which we call the cave psalms, psalms from the cave. So I'll give you a couple of examples. And David describes what happens in a time of grief. Psalm 142. I cry aloud with my voice to the Lord. I make supplication with my voice to the Lord. I pour out my complaints before him. I declare my trouble before him. And then in verse 3 it says, when my spirit was overwhelmed within me. And it's like that blanket. My spirit, which is the core of my being.
Just overwhelming.
It's just completely covered. I'm there alone in blackness, and it feels like nobody else understands. I can't take anymore. It's too much for me. I'm overwhelmed. I'm drowning. And then he says, you knew my path in the way where I walked. They have hidden a trap for me, and nobody cares for my soul. Nobody cares. That's the way he feels. It's a feeling. People do care for him, but he feels like nobody cares. He's all by himself. In Psalm 143, the next door, he says, the enemy has persecuted my soul. See, the enemy doesn't attack our bodies as much as he attacks our soul area. And he can't attack our spirit, because God lives there, so he attacks our soul. Our feelings, or our will, our thought patterns, our attitudes. That's where the arrows of the enemy come. And so he was being persecuted in his soul. It says he has crushed my life to the ground. He has made me dwell in dark places like those who have been long dead. I just feel like I'm enshrouded in a cloud of blackness. And therefore my spirit, my God part, is overwhelmed within me, and my heart is appalled within me. And so there he was in this pit, in this overwhelmed place, and like he's drowning and nobody helps. And then there's a process that he goes through of getting out of that. And that's what I call the mourning process. So grief is the emotion, mourning is the process to come out of that pit that we feel like we're in.
I was just looking, at the book here, and you show very well that process, and to draw the distinction between grief and mourning, I think is important to do, because I think we use those words almost synonymously,
interchangeably,
with each other.
Yeah.
But what we need to do is, so the grief is that initial feeling that really wants to overtake you.
Yeah.
And if you stay there, you'll miss the mourning process. And today I want you to know, we're going to bring you to a place of joy.
Yeah.
We're going to get you there.
Yeah.
But there is a process of mourning that we need to go through.
So here's how the definition in the dictionary.
Okay.
Grief is a deep sorrow or a mental distress caused by loss, affliction, or remorse. It affects the soul area. It's not a sickness that will get better one day. It's not an injury, but grief deals with an amputation. And that's an important distinction.
That's good.
Yeah, if I lose my arm, it's not going to get better. It's not going to grow back again. Mm-hmm. I have to learn to live without the arm and survive, writing with my left hand or using my left hand or whatever it is. It's a loss. It's not something that's going to grow back. Sickness is probably going to get better again. An injury is going to recover. But grief deals with a loss. It's something that's not there anymore. Now I have to learn how to live without it. And that's the mourning process, learning how to live without what I've lost.
Good. I like that. No, because it helps you.
Yeah.
It helps you understand. Okay,
and
good.
we'll come out better on the other side.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that when we're going through it because we're overwhelmed. We don't feel it. So I've lost my job, and I'm not going to get my job back again.
Right.
Now, what does that mean to me? I've been fired when I was a young man. I was a truck driver, and I was a terrible truck driver, and I got fired for it. And I was married, and my wife was expecting our first baby, and I go home with this paper in my hand and say, "You've now been fired, and you have no severance pay. You've lost." Now, what do? I wasn't getting, and I didn't want the job back because I wasn't a very good truck driver. So it was a whole change point in my life of how to find another. And that's when I moved into a career that led me into some business training and helped me in the future. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. But it was devastating at the time.
Yeah. So there was a definite grief.
Yes.
But then you went through the mourning, and as a result, came out better on the other side.
Loss of a person. Almost every week I talk to somebody. I think this last week I've talked to 2 people that have just lost somebody. In their cases, they both lost a spouse. Mm-hmm. And it seems like the end of the world. And to me and you, it would be the end of our world as it exists. But I'm not dead. So what do I do from that point on? How do I learn to live as a single person? And what will that mean to my identity? It's that regrowth process. It's huge. And sometimes bigger than others. So it could be a loss of a pet. And it seems like we'll never get past that. But we do. Or a loss of our hair, in yours in my case. Or a loss of whatever. And sometimes, I know a guy that lost his hair. As an example of this, he never got past it. He ended up going into a slump and he committed suicide. He never learned how to mourn. Other people lose things that are obviously more serious than hair. Mm-hmm. They lose something and they never go through the mourning process. They get stuck and they just give up. Mm-hmm. They dwell in darkness for the rest of their days. So mourning is a very vital healing process that God intends for us.
Okay.
So let's go through. I'll just go through a couple of examples of little griefs and big griefs. Little griefs are, my child has fallen and hurt himself, and I rush him to the hospital. Or we had a child that swallowed a pin. Not our child, but one of the people in our church swallowed a pin not long ago. And the pin's inside his body. There's a grief. Mother is shocked. They sent a prayer request out to all the churches. My child's in emergency, and we got to get this pin through the body. That's a little grief. It's huge at that moment, but it's a relatively little grief. And thankfully, the pin came out, and the child is doing fine. I have a good friend who they moved as pastors from the States to Canada. And the wife was grieving the loss of her grandchildren who were still down in the States. And you understand this kind of thing. Sure. So she was flying back and forth. Eventually, she never got through the mourning process, and they ended up leaving the church that they had just come to and flying back and living back in the States because she couldn't get through it. She didn't get through the mourning process. So all those retirement, some people don't adjust to retirement. Mm-hmm. Old age where you're losing your eyesight or losing your ability to walk or losing your driver's license or losing your hearing or losing your sexual function. All those are relatively little griefs. And then there's the big griefs. And big griefs, of course, would be loss of a child. I just can't even imagine what it would be like. And when you're talking to somebody who has lost a child, I haven't lost a child, you can't say, "Oh, I understand," or "Here's what you got to do." You just got to enter into it with them. and feel their pain the best you can. We can't even relate to that. You just can't offer solutions for that. It's going to be a long process to get through that. But the big griefs are like things that literally knock you off your footing. We were down in Mexico not long ago, and the waves, as I'm getting older, I'm getting weaker, and you go into these big waves will knock me over. And I found I was just too weak to almost crawl out, and the waves just kept coming and coming and coming. I felt like I was going to die there. And gradually I crawled out of there. But that's kind of what it is with a big grief, a loss of somebody, especially a death in a family. So now we go through the mourning process. And if in the book I outline it's in this chapter 2 there somewhere. There it is on page 18. It goes through about 7 phases of this mourning process. So this is what we're going to experience. So I'll just start with a couple of them, then we'll take a break and we'll come back to that. The first thing that happens, say we'll just talk about death for a moment. The first thing that happens is somebody dies. So I got a call, I guess 3 days ago, from a lady. Her husband's only in her 50s, and they had been separated, and she got a call that her husband has just died, and she's just devastated. Devastated more because her last conversation with him was very negative, and now he's gone. And so you enter into this time which we call shock. And shock is good. Shock is like the shocks in your car. You're going over bumps and it absorbs the pain. So shock, you don't feel anything for a while. And sometimes we think somebody that loses a spouse and they look really together, we think they're fine. What a man of faith or a woman of faith. But it's shock that they've settled into. I have a good friend that was in a car accident not long ago. And he got out of the car. It was another car. It was a head-on crash, and the cars were both almost demolished. He got out of his car, and he called 911. He checked everybody. Are you okay? Are you okay? Called the police came. The ambulance came, and not until after the ambulance arrived, he realized that he was very seriously injured. But he was operating on shock, and he was taking care of everything. He's a take charge kind of guy, but that was just shock that carried him through. So shock absorbs the initial pain, and that's a good thing.
I've experienced it several times, with my children, accidents, those kinds of things. I go into shock.
Yeah.
Like that, I just like.
That's right.
And Audrey goes into shock, and she's into action.
Is she?
Yeah, she just takes charge. I'm like, wow, my son was hit by a car.
Oh, no.
Yeah. This is... let me think, 7, 8, 9 years ago, 9, 10 years ago, hit by a car, and it's a miracle. I mean, a total miracle. But when we showed up at that hospital, I was in shock, and Audrey, she went right into action, and, just caring for him, speaking to him, and I just sat there and crying, it was horrible.
But she may go through another time later on where she has to back up and...
Yeah. Well, and that's what happened in the transition. When he came home, Papa had to carry him.
Yeah.
He had to, do more than just, be in shock, type of thing. And then she was able to, go through the healing process with him. Yeah. After that. So, that's right. But yeah, these are.
But the shock is a good thing. Keeps us safe for a while. And then the emotions will pour forth.
Yeah.
And we wonder what's happened to us. We're falling apart. We thought we had it together, but that was just shock. It's an adrenaline rush or whatever it is. And then we begin to fall apart. And that's really the second stage, is the emotions.
Okay. I'm just going to, real quickly here, read these through, and then we'll take a break and come back. And what they are is, and it's not necessarily that you go through them in a sequential order.
That's right.
But you may skip some and never really have any of them.
That's
but
right.
They're all a part of it. But this is part of the healing, and that's why Barry's here. We don't want you to stay in the past, in this grieving, loss stage, but rather allow God to bring a healing to your life that you might experience life and joy again. So we have shock, we have feelings, physical symptoms, attitudes, resistance, glimmer of light, and a firm reality. And there are faith elements to these as well. So stay with us. We'll just take a quick break, and we'll be back with Pastor Barry Buzza right after this. If you've been suffering, with a shroud of darkness over your life, and you've just really been grieving a loss that's taken place, I want you to know that today's program is designed just for you, because we want to take you, from really a valley or a shadow of darkness, a place of death, and we want to bring you to a place of life and light and love, where you can begin to enjoy life again. And it's not an issue of, just get over it, but rather going through a mourning process where you can find true life and where you can find joy again. So our guest today is Dr. Barry Buzza, and he's a pastor in Coquitlam, British Columbia. He's the president of the Foursquare Fellowship here in Canada. And Barry, thank you, for coming as a friend, but as a pastor to our viewing audience today, and just helping us through, loss that we all experience in life.
Yeah, we've talked earlier in the program about what happens. So this grief comes, this natural, God-given emotion of grief. Jesus himself felt grief at loss. But there is this process. So the first step that happens, and this is God too, is we move into shock. And the shock's a protection against the initial pain of grief. The second, after we go through that shock, we begin to get this rush of emotions. We don't do emotions well in North America. My grandma, who's dead now, my grandma lost her son in World War II. He was 22 years old. She gets word that her son has just been killed. It was just right at the very last week of the war.
Oh, my.
And she said to her family, she said, Jim's gone. We're never going to mention his name again. That was it.
Oh.
Period. That was it. And she never allowed her family to grieve. She never talked about him again. That was how she dealt with grief.
Oh.
Now we're a lot better
so
now.
She didn't do emotions.
She didn't do it. She didn't.
Yeah.
She just cut it off. And so I would try to get information about my Uncle Jimmy who died in the war, and nobody would talk about it. And that's very unhealthy.
Yeah.
Other cultures, they will cry and mourn. And I was in the Philippines just last year, and there was a lady that had died in one of the poorer areas. They laid her out. For a week, she just lay dead in their house, and neighbors would come, and they'd cry and weep, and you could hear it all down the street. Then they have a burial, and they have a marching band, and they march down the streets and wail and cry. And we look at that and we say, well, we're more reserved than that. We admire people like Jacqueline Kennedy when John Kennedy died, and how reserved they were. Or Prince Charles when Diana died, and how reserved he was and the boys were. But somewhere there's a balance that emotion is okay.
Yeah.
God, crying is okay. Go ahead and cry. And you'll be crying. My mom died when she was 42 years old. We had 6 kids at home. And
Very young.
She died of lung cancer, never smoked a day in her life, just was gone. We didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to her. It happened so quickly. And that was, how many years ago? That was 40 years ago, whatever it was. And I still will get... my daughter gets married, or my grandson is born, and I cry over my mom dying. I wish she were here. She's never met my wife. She's never met my kids, and there's bursts of emotion.
Yeah.
That's God.
But you see, as you move through the seasons of your life, you have to go through the grieving of the loss again.
That's right.
Of this reality you wanted to have so bad, but it's not.
Yeah.
And it's okay.
And you said earlier that these things don't follow in the exact order.
Okay.
When my mom died, we were pretty stoic. We're a pretty stoic family, and we helped everybody else through the process. But it's years later that you eventually have to let things out, and crying, feelings of loneliness, despair. Those are normal parts of the grieving process. Yes. It's okay. Let somebody cry.
Yeah.
Don't say get up and get on with life. It's let them cry. It's okay. And so take your time with the feelings of emotion. But it can go on too long. It can go on forever and ever and ever. Now, if you're 80 years old and you lose your spouse, you probably never will get past it. And that's okay. That's just okay, because you just can't expect a person to bounce back. I mean, it's just the loneliness that comes at that time. You've lived 60 years together, and to lose somebody. But as a younger person, there's going to be this time you got to get on with life. Yeah. So we move on past the emotions, and we connect. It's connected to the body. There's actually physical symptoms. Our bodies are very intricately connected to our souls, and so there's actual pain, there's the fainting, there's dizziness, there's heart palpitations that actually come. And that's when you need to talk. Talk to God. Talk to your pastor. Talk to friends. Just talk about the person. And if you're a friend of someone that's lost someone, you just need to let them talk and go on. Show pictures and laugh together and cry together and all those kinds of things. So that's the third step, is that physical symptoms that will come. Mm-hmm. Don't feel like you're dying. Some people actually feel like they are dying, but it's not that way. Number 5, it comes down to the depths of our spirit. And this is the bottom of the kind of the process, the mourning process. And this affects the very deepest attitudes that we have. We're going to deal with things like anger. You're angry at God for taking your spouse. Anger at God for allowing your child to die. You're going to be angry at that person for dying and for not being there anymore. Angry at them for not taking care of the insurance. I wrote in the book about this dear girl, Mary, who, that's not her real name, but she had lost her husband. She kissed him goodbye, went off to work. He's, I think, 36, whatever he was. And somebody was dialing their cell phone, crashed into him, and it was the end, just like that. And we were working through this together as I was writing this book. And she was just angry at him. He hadn't taken care of life insurance. He had no will. And the husband that she loved had left her, and the emotion was anger. And now, if we don't get past that, then that's going to affect us in the depths of our spirit. We have to work through the deep sense of anger, unforgiveness, guilt for not saying something, for not being there on time. And so that's in the depths of our spirit. And that comes just through confession. Lord, I'm feeling these feelings of anger. I'm feeling this deep unforgiveness. I'm feeling this guilt. I'm sorry, Lord. Forgive me for that. Wash me clean. And it's a spiritual cleansing that God has to do in the very depths of who we are. Mm-hmm. So that's number 4. And then number 5 is the pivotal time, and that's the act of our will. We have to make a decision. I will not stay here in this valley. I'm moving out. And it may come... Well, I know a lady in our church that lost her husband. She locked herself in her room for 3 years. She didn't want visitors. She just was there, and she just stayed there. They're very unhealthy, but she stayed there for 3 years. After 3 years, she said, I'm tired of this. She opened the door, she walked out, she says, okay, I'm moving on with life now. So it doesn't always happen in 2 weeks. Sometimes they say, come on, it's been 3 weeks since your husband died, let's get on with life, let's go do something. It doesn't happen that way. So it's different for different people. Mm-hmm. But there comes a time when you have to say, I've had enough. I'm moving out.
And is this something that you have to yourself resolve? Because it's not always easy when somebody else tells you.
No. You don't want to hear it.
But this is a personal resolve that you need to deal with yourself.
You get to that place, and it's been a year, and it's time to clean out the closet, or it's time to open my daughter, say your daughter died, and I've left her room as a shrine. It's time to open the door and to change things around. I'll always remember my daughter. And the fear is people have forgotten. They don't remember what's happened, and I'll forget. That's the fear. So we don't want to go back. We resist going back. But there comes that time when you just have to say, it's time. I'm going back. Yeah. That's the turning point right there.
Yeah.
And then number 6 is the clouds break. Now we know, back when David wrote this, they didn't have airplanes and they couldn't go up above the clouds. So they see clouds and it looks like the end of the world. But we can go up above the clouds in an airplane and see the blue sky above. It's always there.
Yes.
But there comes a time when the clouds just break apart and the storm subsides and there's a ray of light that comes. It's going to come. It's that returning time again. And it's a wonderful time. It's morning has broken. The night is passing. There's a ray of light that's coming. And that time will come. Mm-hmm. Usually it's about 2 years. The process of mourning is about 2 years. And we just have to wait for it. Mm-hmm. But it does come eventually. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't mean we're not going to have bursts of grief. There may be a song that sets us off, or maybe a smell that sets us off, or it may be a picture that sets us off. But basically, the light is beginning to come again. Mm-hmm.
Let me just jump in there on this 2-year thing. Just because Audrey and I, we deal with a lot of marriages that find themselves in crisis which is a loss.
Yes, it is.
There's been an affair, and all of a sudden they're in loss.
Yep.
And then they'll read something, or they'll hear you or something and say, yeah, it's going to be 2 years, and they're like, that's too long.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, they'll give up, and they'll bypass a mourning process, and the end result is not getting over it. The end result is life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not that, oh, I've survived. No, you're going to learn to live and enjoy life to the fullest again. It'll be different.
Be different.
It will be different, but this is where God, our Redeemer, comes in.
That's right.
And He's able to rescue our life to the extent that sometimes you'll be able to look back and you'll think, wow, that may have just been God's will.
Yeah.
That may have just been God doing it. You know, but in the incident of an affair, never. It's sin.
Yeah.
But where sin hits your life, God can redeem it to the extent where you can look back and think, wow,
yeah,
God, you did this. You've redeemed me.
Yeah.
And so I don't want people to think, oh, 2 years, that's too long. I'm going to give up.
Yeah.
I'm going to go hibernate. I'm going to leave. I'm going to abandon.
Yeah.
No. This is a process where God's going to move you from glory to glory, from strength to strength.
Yeah.
You know, He wants to mature you and grow you up, that you might be strong, because there's others around you that need you.
That's right.
They really need you. And so embrace this, that you might find life.
Joseph had gone through, tremendous grief with rejection of his brothers, being sold as a slave. And at the end of Genesis in chapter 50, verse 20, he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And so there is evil that happens.
Absolutely.
Divorce or adultery, those are evil that happens. But even those evil things, God can turn around, and does turn around, and bring good out of what was very intended to destroy us by the devil.
And that's what makes Him God.
It's awesome.
I love it.
It's a miracle. It's wonderful
really
working with God. It really is.
Yeah.
We come to phase 7, and phase 7 is we come back to reality. I talked about this amputation. I don't have an arm anymore. It's gone. I have to learn to live with my left hand, or whatever it is. I have to learn to live with this deficiency, without my husband, without my child, without whoever it is.
Yes.
And by the way, you talked about divorce. Divorce is probably worse than death, because you're still living with this skeleton all the time. But it's the same thing. You have to learn. I am now a single person. I'm learning to live as a single person now. The reality has happened. So that's you don't become your old self again. You become a new self.
Yes, you do.
It's a brand new. So there's a couple of things we have to learn to do. We have to acknowledge the reality of a loss. It really is a loss, and don't live in denial. It really is a loss. Number 2, we have to understand what you just said. We have to see pain as a gift. God's going to do something through the pain. God specializes in taking bad things and making them into good, in redemption. That's number 2. Number 3, we have to value our memories. So don't throw away the old cards and the pictures and all those memories. We value and hold on to those memories. And then number 4 is we have to get to know our new identity. Who am I now? I am this person. I remember one lady had a wonderful, strong marriage, and lost her husband far too young, and went through a tremendous mourning process, but came out the other side, and she realized that now I am free to do whatever God wants. I don't have to care for my husband anymore. And she began to move into some missions work that she could never have done, because her primary job before was to care for her husband. And it freed her up to be she never thought that this could happen. But she actually came to enjoy her new life. Not that she forgot her husband, not that she didn't love her husband, but actually enjoyed the new life that God gave to her. So there is new things ahead. Find out what my purpose is now as a single person, and where I'm going now. I just want to talk about one thing before I conclude, is if we don't have an anchor during times of mourning, we're going to drift off, and it could actually devastate us. This is when a relationship with God is going to hold us steady. This young girl I wrote about in my book, her name is Mary, and when she lost her husband, she just fell apart. She had kids at home, she had debts, she had to move back with her parents again, she had to find her new identity as a person. She wasn't a believer. She had been brought up in a nominal church. But we spent some time together in counseling, and we sat down, and in the service I went through Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, and talked about the valley of the shadow of death. And there was one passage in that psalm that really got hold of her, and she was very open to God, very soft at that time. And it says, yea, though I walk the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. And I said to her privately, and I said publicly too, that it's no longer the Lord does this, or he does this, or he does this, third person. It's now you are with me. It switches from third person to second person. And the valley of the shadow of death does that. It brings us into an intimate place, face to face with God.
That's great.
And she met God in a very deep way. This may never have happened because they were well off and happy and not thinking about God because they were living their lives. But now she was brought face to face with God. And she asked Jesus Christ into her heart as her personal Savior. And it's that relationship with Jesus, that the death process brought her to that place that kept her strong. And she grew through that period of time in a relationship with God. And that was her anchor that carried her through. It was devastating, those couple of years learning to walk somewhere by herself, go on holidays without her husband. It was devastating to her. Having no one come home at night, sleeping alone, all those kinds of things. Raising her children alone. But when she found this relationship with God, that's what carried her through. There's a book a book that I read a little while ago, Memento Mori, it's called. It's a story about it's a fiction book, but it's a story about six people. And they all had an anonymous phone call. And the anonymous phone call said, you are going to die. And so the whole story is about these 6 people that received this phone call that you are about to die. And it changed their entire life. Because they began to think, even though it was a very negative thing, they began to think about them, that they had this moment of life left. And it's, what do I do with my life? And that's the question. I had a friend of mine that was, he was a pilot. And he and a friend of his were flying together, and the plane crashed, and his friend died, and he lived. And his friend was, and he was responsible, he was the pilot. And he cried and cried. And this guy that died was a young pastor. And he said, why, Lord, why, Lord, why, Lord, why did you take so-and-so? And he just devastated by it. And in the quietness of his mourning process, God says, you're asking the wrong question. The question is not, why did so-and-so die? But it's, why are you alive? And it's, why am I alive today? What do I do with this moment that I have now? That's the ultimate question that we have to ask.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah.
You know, today, I think many people just watching the program wasn't expecting this, but I'm recognizing areas in my life possibly that I've just shut down and have neglected the mourning process, that I might find God in it.
Yeah.
You know, that I might come face to face with Him in my life, totally be revolutionized through this.
Yeah.
And
the best things happen in the valley of the shadow of death. The valley of the shadow of death, David says, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, the rod of God, the discipline of God, the staff of God, which is the protection of God. I'm protected from my enemies. My enemies are howling. The pain and the loneliness are howling around me. But God prepares a table before me. And then it says, He anoints my head with oil. My destiny is found in the valley of the shadow of death. God brings the hardest time of our life to become the very best time of our life. And He has destiny for us. So, some people are saying, I can't see that, because they're still in the valley. But it's there yet. The sun is going to come out again. And morning is around the corner. Every night it's black, but in the morning the sun comes out again.
Yeah.
And there is hope.
Yeah. I remember my pastor, and I was going through my valley, my dark, dark time. And he said this to me. He says, Bob, one day you're going to be thankful for this. What are you?
It doesn't make sense.
Really stupid or what? Thankful for this?
Yeah.
But through the process, here's the thing. I now know God. I have now come face to face with Him.
Yeah.
For it happening, never. It was wrong. Never should have happened. You know, those kinds of things. It was painful. It hurt.
Yeah.
But my Redeemer.
Yeah.
I've come to know Him, and He knows me, and it's more than okay. it's glorious.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's good.
Barry, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This has been wonderful. You're going to be with us tomorrow. And tomorrow is...
We're going to talk about preparing to die. Now, we're all going to die, unless Jesus comes back, which we pray he does.
Yeah.
But we're all going to die. And so how do I prepare for that ultimate death?
Okay. All right. Well, today has been, I think, very, very helpful because we've all experienced loss. But that doesn't have to identify you. You know, your past, the grieving, that doesn't have to identify. Might you be identified by the grace of God, the enablement of God, and the life that he wants to bring to you through this mourning process, that you would be truly a person of joy and happiness. The book, Good Mourning, is available from us here at New Day Ministries. I encourage you, get several copies of this and begin to share them with your friends and your neighbors, the people that God brings into your life. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back with more of It's a New Day right after this.
I'm so thankful for Barry Buzza taking time to bring us great understanding when it comes to times like this.
And I think we, as believers, people of faith, knowing Jesus, should be the ones with the answers. And not just having an answer, but to be able to grieve with and help people through the process. I think a lot of times you didn't realize it. And I think that we, you know, as a family and as the body of Christ, need to come around and help one another grieve healthy, because it is a loss.
I'm amazed how my reaction has been in various situations. In the past, I've avoided people going through difficult times because I didn't know what to do. I didn't. So, and rather than just go and be with them, I've
been so scared of saying the wrong thing.
I know, and I've discovered, because I've gone through periods of time now where there've been loss in my life, and I've discovered someone just being alongside, not trying to say all the things, but loving me, just saying I love you, has been most effective in helping me.
And the other thing I've noticed as a response to grief, a friend of ours, a young, you know, my age kind of girl, with 3 boys, teenage boys, passed away recently. And I've noticed that some believers are really full of judgment of how her husband is grieving. You know, he's not doing things right. He's not grieving enough. He's not. And
who do you please on that? That can be a real challenge.
I just find that really difficult, because we do need to love people through their grief and not judge how they're grieving or how that looks like. Sometimes, you know, his wife was dying for 3 years, and so he's just feeling very free to enjoy life a little bit, and that offends people. And you think, you know, we don't know what people have gone through. We can't presume that we should tell people how to feel.
We had a friend whose husband passed away. This is quite a number of years back, but it was interesting to realize, you know what, I don't understand the process.
No.
I don't understand, and I want to walk with people and love them along the way, because there's a time coming when I again will go through grief.
Yes.
And I just want people to love me.
And God goes before us.
And it's an emotion that God gives.
I know.
You know, it is. It's
true.
And that's just a part
it's
of
a gift
life,
from the Lord.
And so today, you know, if you're in that place, allow the comfort of God, but also allow the comfort of others to come around you. And today, I just want you to know how dearly loved you are, and cherished and valued you are. And if you're in a point of sorrow, there will come joy, you know, out of it. There's joy yet ahead of you. It is.
Darkness remains for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And I pray that you feel the love and care of God and the comfort of the Holy Spirit on your life. We'll see you next time on It's New Day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.